The second evening began exactly as Diana had predicted. James arrived at the collection trust for his volunteer overtime shift, checking in with the night security supervisor who barely looked up from his paperwork. The building had settled into its quiet nighttime routine, with skeletal staffing and automated systems monitoring the various exhibitions and storage areas. James made his standard rounds, documenting his observations in the security log and ensuring that all displays remained properly secured. The Diana memorial case showed no signs of tampering or disturbance, the sapphire necklace resting peacefully in its specially designed mount. But James could feel an electricity in the air, a sense of anticipation that seemed to emanate from the jewelry itself. At exactly 11 o'clock, as Diana had foretold, the building's electrical system experienced a brief fluctuation. The lights dimmed for approximately 30 seconds before returning to normal brightness, and several security monitors flickered during the disturbance. James felt his heart rate increase as he realized that Diana had indeed found a way to manipulate the building's systems from whatever realm she now inhabited. Following established protocol for electrical anomalies, James initiated a comprehensive security check that would require him to physically inspect valuable items that might have been affected by power surges. He documented the start of his inspection in the security log, noting the time and the specific procedures he was following. Anyone reviewing the records later would see only routine adherence to safety protocols. The memorial case required a special key that James had been given earlier that day, along with explicit instructions about handling procedures for the valuable items within. Dr. Chun had personally briefed him on the proper techniques for examining delicate jewelry, emphasizing the importance of wearing cotton gloves and using specialized tools to avoid any damage. As James approached the case with his inspection equipment, the air around him began to shimmer with the same otherworldly quality he had experienced the previous night. Diana's presence filled the exhibition hall, though she remained invisible to his eyes. Instead, he felt her guidance as a subtle influence on his movements, directing his attention to specific aspects of the security procedures. The cameras are looping previous footage, Diana's voice whispered in his mind rather than his ears. You have exactly 12 minutes before the system resets to live monitoring. That should be more than enough time if we work efficiently. James opened the memorial case with trembling hands, the specialized locks disengaging with soft clicks that seemed thunderously loud in the quiet hall. The necklace lay before him, its sapphire pendant catching the exhibition lighting and casting blue reflections across the white velvet lining of the display. Lift it carefully, Diana's guidance continued. Support the chain with both hands to avoid putting stress on the clasp mechanism. The hidden compartment is in the pendant itself, but accessing it requires specific pressure points that must be activated in sequence. James followed her instructions, raising the necklace with the reverent care of someone handling a religious artifact. The weight of the piece surprised him, heavier than its appearance suggested, probably due to the quality of the metals and stones used in its construction. But beyond its physical properties, the necklace seemed to carry emotional weight as well, as if it had absorbed decades of hopes, fears, and secrets. Turn the pendant over, Diana directed. You'll see what appears to be decorative scrollwork around the edge of the setting. 3 of those scroll patterns are actually pressure points. Press the one at the top first, hold for 3 seconds, then the left side, then the right. The mechanism will click when it's properly activated. James studied the back of the pendant, his fingers tracing the intricate metalwork until he identified the specific elements Diana had described. The craftsmanship was so precise that the functional components were virtually indistinguishable from purely decorative details. Only someone with intimate knowledge of the piece could have identified the hidden mechanism. He pressed the first point as instructed, feeling a slight give in the metal that suggested internal springs or levers responding to his touch. The second and third pressure points activated with similar subtle movements, and, after a moment of silence, James heard the soft click Diana had mentioned. Perfect, her voice seemed to smile with satisfaction. Now press gently on the center of the sapphire while pulling the bottom edge of the setting. A small panel should slide open, revealing the hidden compartment. James felt his pulse racing as he followed Diana's instructions. The sapphire stone moved under pressure, and the bottom section of the pendant's setting slid away to reveal a cavity no larger than his thumbnail. Within the small space, he could see several folded papers, each piece thin enough to fit within the limited confines of the compartment. "Take them out carefully," Diana urged. "Some of those documents are nearly 30 years old, and the paper may be fragile." James extracted the papers one by one, using the tip of his inspection tool to avoid damaging them with direct finger contact. Each document was folded multiple times to fit within the compartment, and as he unfolded them on the examination table, he began to understand the scope of what Diana had been dealing with during her final months. The first document was a detailed report of a private conversation between Diana and several representatives of international children's charities. The report included specific quotes and references to sensitive political situations in various countries, information that could potentially compromise ongoing humanitarian efforts if it fell into the wrong hands. The second paper contained detailed notes about Diana's personal relationships with various members of the royal family, including private comments she had made about internal disagreements and policy differences. The information was presented in a clinical, almost scientific manner that made Diana's personal struggles seem like data points in a research study. But it was the third document that made James's blood run cold. It was a detailed psychological profile of Diana, complete with analysis of her emotional vulnerabilities and suggestions for how those weaknesses might be exploited for political or financial gain. The document read like a playbook for manipulation, reducing a complex human being to a series of pressure points that could be activated to achieve desired outcomes. "Now you understand." Diana's voice carried deep sadness. "Alessandro wasn't just documenting our conversations. He was studying me like a laboratory specimen, looking for ways to control my actions and influence my decisions. I trusted him with information that could hurt people I cared about, and he turned that trust into a weapon." James felt a surge of protective anger on Diana's behalf. "How could someone do this to you?" "Because I was naive," Diana replied with painful honesty. "I wanted so desperately to make a real difference in the world that I trusted people who seemed to share my passions. I didn't realize that my position made me valuable for reasons that had nothing to do with charitable work." James gathered the documents together, preparing to destroy them as Diana had requested. But before he could reach for the lighter he had brought for this purpose, Diana's voice stopped him. "Wait," she said urgently. "There's something else you need to see first." James felt guided to unfold one of the documents more completely, revealing additional text that had been hidden in the multiple folds. This section contained names and contact information for several people Diana had apparently confided in about her suspicions regarding Count Alessandro. "Those people helped me investigate Alessandro's background during my final weeks," Diana explained. "They may still be in danger if his son decides to pursue them as potential sources of damaging information. You need to make copies of that list before you destroy the documents." James's mind raced as he considered the implications. "What am I supposed to do with the names?" "Contact them," Diana said firmly. "Warn them that Alessandro Jr. may try to approach them with offers of money for information about me. They deserve to know that their safety could be at risk." James found himself facing a moral complexity he had not anticipated. Destroying the documents was one thing. It simply eliminated evidence of past wrongdoing. But actively contacting people to warn them about potential threats would make him a participant in ongoing intelligence operations that went far beyond his authority or expertise. "I can't get involved in that kind of work," he protested. "I'm a security guard, not a spy." "You're a protector," Diana countered. "That's what you've always been, what you'll always be. These people helped me when I needed assistance, and now they may need help themselves. You're the only one who knows about the danger they face." James stared at the list of names, recognizing several as prominent figures in British charitable organizations and international human rights groups. These were people with families, careers, and reputations that could be destroyed if they became targets of blackmail or political manipulation. "How do I contact them without revealing classified information about this mission?" "You tell them the truth," Diana said simply. "That you've discovered evidence of a potential threat to people who were associated with me during my final years. You don't need to explain how you obtained the information. only that they should be cautious about anyone asking questions about their past interactions with me. James made quick copies of the relevant names and contact information using his phone camera, then gathered all the original documents together on the examination table. The lighter felt heavy in his hand as he prepared to complete the mission Diana had entrusted to him. "Are you certain this is the right thing to do?" he asked one final time. "I'm certain that these papers have caused enough pain," Diana replied. "Alessandro used them to manipulate me during the most vulnerable period of my life. His son wants to profit from that same manipulation by selling my private thoughts and feelings to the highest bidder. That cycle needs to end here, tonight." James flicked the lighter, and the small flame cast dancing shadows across the exhibition hall. He touched the fire to the corner of the document stack, watching as the papers began to curl and blacken. The flames grew quickly, consuming decades of deception and betrayal in a matter of minutes. As the last of the documents turned to ash, James felt a profound sense of relief wash over him. Whatever consequences might follow from his actions tonight, he knew that he had prevented genuine harm to people who deserved protection. Diana's secrets would remain private, and her memory would be preserved with the dignity she had always sought in life. "Thank you." Diana's voice carried infinite gratitude. "You've given me something I could never find on my own, the peace that comes from knowing the people I loved are safe." James carefully cleaned up the remnants of the burned documents, ensuring that no evidence remained of what had transpired. He then returned the necklace to its display mount, taking special care to ensure that the hidden compartment was properly closed and that the pendant appeared exactly as it had before his examination. The memorial case was secured and locked. The inspection equipment was returned to its proper storage location, and James completed his documentation in the security log. Anyone reviewing his work would see only routine maintenance performed in response to an electrical anomaly, exactly the kind of thorough professionalism that had characterized his entire career. As James prepared to complete his shift and return home, he felt Diana's presence beginning to fade from the exhibition hall. The otherworldly energy that had guided him through the mission was dissipating, leaving behind only the normal quiet of the museum after hours. "Will I see you again?" James asked the empty air. "Not like this." Diana's voice was barely a whisper now. "This was the last piece of unfinished business that kept me bound to your world. Now I can finally rest, knowing that the people I cared about are protected from further harm." James stood alone in the exhibition hall, surrounded by centuries of royal history and the weight of his own small part in that ongoing story. The sapphire necklace gleamed innocently in its display case, showing no sign of the dramatic events that had just unfolded around it. Over the following weeks, James discreetly contacted each of the people whose names had appeared on Diana's list. His conversations were brief and carefully worded, but each person understood the seriousness of his warning. Several reported receiving suspicious inquiries shortly after James's call, attempts at contact from individuals claiming to be researchers or journalists interested in Diana's charitable work. Count Alessandro Benedetti Jr. did indeed attempt to sell what he claimed were exclusive documents about Diana's private life. However, without the most damaging papers that had been hidden in the necklace, his collection proved to be mostly routine correspondence and public statements that held little commercial value. The anticipated auction was quietly canceled, and Alessandro Jr. retreated to his family's estate in Switzerland, apparently unaware that his most valuable assets had literally gone up in smoke. The Diana Memorial Exhibition opened to great public acclaim 3 weeks later, with the sapphire necklace serving as its centerpiece. Thousands of visitors paused before the display case, many commenting on the unusual emotional impact of the piece. Several guards reported that people often became tearful when viewing the necklace, as if they were experiencing some form of direct connection to Diana's memory. James continued his duties with the Royal Collection Trust for another 5 years before retiring with full honors. He never spoke publicly about his midnight encounter with Diana, but he found that his experience had given him a deeper appreciation for the human stories behind the historical artifacts he protected. On his final day of service, James made one last visit to the Diana Memorial Exhibition. The hall was empty except for maintenance staff preparing for the next day's visitors. James stood before the necklace case, remembering the extraordinary events that had unfolded there years earlier. For a moment, he thought he saw a brief flicker of blue light within the sapphire pendant, accompanied by a sense of gratitude and peace that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. Then, the moment passed, leaving James with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had helped complete Diana's final mission of protection for the people she loved. The necklace continued to draw visitors from around the world, each person finding their own meaning in its beauty and historical significance. But James knew its deepest secret, that some forms of love and loyalty are strong enough to transcend death itself, and that true nobility lies not in titles or positions but in the willingness to protect others from harm. Years later, when asked by his grandchildren about his most memorable experience during his royal service, James would smile and speak of the importance of paying attention to people who might be struggling, even when they seemed to have everything the world could offer. He would tell them that sometimes the greatest honor comes not from serving institutions, but from serving the human hearts that give those institutions meaning. The sapphire necklace remained in the collection trust, its hidden compartment empty, but its true value immeasurably increased by the story of redemption it had helped to complete. Diana's final secret was safe, her memory was protected, and the people she had loved could continue their important work without fear of exploitation or betrayal. In the end, James Morrison had discovered that being a royal guard meant more than protecting buildings and ceremonies. Sometimes it meant protecting the very essence of what made the monarchy worthy of service. The recognition that with great privilege comes great responsibility, and that true leadership lies in caring for those who cannot protect themselves. The blue sapphire caught the morning light as it had for years, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the exhibition hall. But now those colors seemed to carry a message of hope rather than sorrow, a promise that love and loyalty could indeed triumph over deception and greed. Diana had found her peace at last, and James had learned that sometimes the greatest adventures come from simple acts of human compassion performed in the quiet hours when no one else is watching. The memorial exhibition continued to inspire visitors from every corner of the globe, each person finding their own connection to the extraordinary woman whose life had been both celebrated and scrutinized on the world stage. But the necklace's most important story remained hidden, known only to one retired guardsman who understood that some secrets are worth keeping, and some missions are worth completing regardless of personal cost. James Morrison carried that knowledge with him into retirement, secure in the understanding that he had played a small but crucial role in protecting the legacy of a princess who had never stopped fighting for the people she loved, even after death had claimed her voice. The blue sapphire would continue to shine for future generations, its true value measured not in carats or pounds sterling, but in the eternal human capacity for love to triumph over betrayal, for loyalty to transcend mortality, and for simple courage to change the course of history itself. The morning mist hung low over Buckingham Palace as James Morrison adjusted his red ceremonial uniform for what he believed would be another ordinary day of duty. 23 years of service to the crown had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. James had been assigned to the Royal Collection Trust that Tuesday morning, a rotation that took him away from his usual post at the palace gates to the quieter halls where priceless artifacts lived behind glass cases. The collection trust housed thousands of items spanning centuries of royal history, from medieval crowns to modern diplomatic gifts. Most visitors moved through these rooms with hushed reverence, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets as they gazed upon objects that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. At 47 years old, James had seen 3 different monarchs during his service. He had stood guard during state visits, royal weddings, and solemn ceremonies. His weathered hands had saluted countless dignitaries, and his sharp eyes had spotted potential threats before they could materialize. But today felt different somehow, though he could not yet put his finger on why. The Collection Trust had recently acquired several new pieces for their upcoming exhibition on royal jewelry through the decades. James had been briefed about increased security measures due to the high value of some items, including pieces on loan from private collectors and international museums. The exhibition was scheduled to open in 3 weeks, and the final installations were taking place throughout the building. Dr. Margaret Chun, the chief curator, arrived at precisely 9 o'clock with a small team of specialists and a heavily guarded transport case. James watched from his position near the main entrance as they wheeled the case through multiple security checkpoints. The paperwork alone seemed to take nearly an hour, with each item requiring detailed documentation and photographic verification. Morrison called Sergeant Williams his immediate supervisor. "You're assigned to shadow Dr. Chin's team today. New acquisition going into the Diana Memorial case. Protocol requires constant security presence during installation." James felt a slight tension in his shoulders at the mention of Diana. Even 26 years after her death, anything connected to the People's Princess carried emotional weight throughout the royal household. Staff members who had served during her lifetime often spoke of her warmth and genuine concern for others, qualities that had made her beloved worldwide but had sometimes created friction within the traditional structure of royal life. The Diana Memorial case occupied a prominent position in the jewelry exhibition hall, surrounded by pieces that told the story of royal women throughout British history. Queen Victoria's mourning jewelry sat adjacent to modern pieces worn by current royal family members at recent state events. The case itself had been specially designed with climate control and advanced security features, its bulletproof glass capable of withstanding significant impact while maintaining crystal clarity. Dr. Chin opened her transport case with ceremonial care, revealing layers of protective foam surrounding individual compartments. James positioned himself at a respectful distance, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to avoid interfering with the delicate work ahead. He had learned over the years that curators approached their tasks with the precision of surgeons, and any distraction could prove costly. The first items emerged slowly. A pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to Diana's grandmother. A bracelet given to her by Prince Charles during their courtship. A brooch that had been a wedding gift from the Queen Mother. Each piece carried its own history, its own story of love, loss, hope, and heartbreak. James found himself drawn into the narrative despite his professional distance. He had been a young guardsman when Diana first arrived at the palace as a shy 19-year-old bride. He remembered the excitement that surrounded her early appearances, the way she seemed to bring light into the formal corridors of royal protocol. He also remembered the later years, when that same light had flickered with uncertainty and pain. Dr. Chin worked methodically, consulting detailed notes and photographs as she arranged each piece within the case. Her assistant, a young man named David, handled the technical aspects of lighting and positioning while a photographer documented every step of the process. James noted the reverence with which they all approached their work, as if they understood they were not simply arranging jewelry, but preserving memory itself. "The centerpiece should go in last," Dr. Chun murmured to her team. "Once we position it properly, we can adjust everything else around it." James noticed that one compartment in the transport case remained sealed, its contents hidden beneath an additional layer of protective material. Whatever lay within clearly held special significance, given the extra precautions surrounding it. His training had taught him to observe such details, to note anything that seemed unusual or particularly important. The morning progressed smoothly as the team worked through their checklist. James found himself remembering specific moments from Diana's public appearances, times when he had been on duty during her visits to various royal engagements. She had possessed an unusual quality among royalty, the ability to make even the most formal occasions feel personal and genuine. He recalled one particular charity event at the palace when Diana had stopped to speak with the security staff afterward. She had thanked them personally for their service, asking about their families, and remembering details from previous conversations. James had been struck by her genuine interest, the way she looked directly into people's eyes when she spoke with them. "James, isn't it?" she had said, somehow recalling his name from a brief introduction months earlier. "How is your daughter doing with her studies? You mentioned she was hoping to become a teacher." That conversation had lasted perhaps 3 minutes, but it had stayed with him for decades. Not because of any profound words exchanged, but because of the simple human recognition it represented. In a world where royal protocol often created distance between people, Diana had found ways to bridge those gaps. Now, as he watched Dr. Chen prepare to unveil the centerpiece of the memorial display, James felt that same sense of personal connection. Whatever lay in that sealed compartment represented not just royal history, but human story, the kind of authentic emotion that Diana had brought to her role despite all the constraints placed upon her. Dr. Chen's hands moved carefully as she broke the final seal. James found himself leaning slightly forward, his professional composure momentarily overtaken by simple curiosity. The protective material fell away to reveal a jewelry box of deep blue velvet, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. "This piece has quite a story," Dr. Chen said softly, her voice carrying a note of reverence. "It was thought to be lost for many years after Diana's death. Only recently did it surface through a private estate sale, and even then, its authenticity required months of verification." She opened the velvet box with deliberate care, and James felt his breath catch in his throat. Nestled within the satin interior was a necklace of extraordinary beauty and obvious significance. The central pendant featured a large sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in what appeared to be white gold or platinum. The design was both elegant and bold, clearly meant to be worn as a statement piece rather than subtle accent jewelry. But it was not the necklace's beauty that caused James's reaction. It was the immediate recognition that flooded through him, accompanied by a rush of memories so vivid they seemed to transport him back in time. He had seen this necklace before, not in photographs or documentation, but in person, worn by Diana herself during what had turned out to be one of her final public appearances. The memory struck him with unexpected force. It had been a state dinner, less than 2 months before Diana's death in Paris. James had been assigned to the receiving line security detail, positioned where he could observe both the arriving guests and the royal family members greeting them. Diana had worn a midnight blue gown that evening, and this necklace had caught the light from the crystal chandeliers above, creating small rainbows that danced across the walls as she moved. What made the memory so vivid was not just the visual impact of the jewelry, but what he had witnessed afterward. Following the formal dinner, James had been reassigned to corridor security during the reception that followed. He had observed Diana step away from the main gathering, moving toward a quieter alcove where she could have a moment of privacy. She had reached up to touch the necklace, her fingers tracing the outline of the sapphire pendant with what had seemed like sadness rather than admiration. James had been too far away to hear any words, but her body language had spoken volumes. Whatever this piece of jewelry represented to her, it carried emotional weight that went beyond its monetary value. Now, standing in the collection trust 26 years later, James felt that same sense of witnessing something deeply personal. Dr. Chun was explaining the necklace's provenance to her assistant, noting the craftsmanship and historical significance, but her words seemed to fade into the background as James struggled with the intensity of his own reaction. He realized his hands were trembling slightly, a physical response that alarmed him. 23 years of military and royal service had taught him to maintain composure under all circumstances, yet here he stood, visibly affected by the sight of a piece of jewelry. He clasped his hands behind his back, hoping to hide the tremor while trying to understand what was happening to him. The technical work of installing the necklace proceeded around him, but James found himself lost in a cascade of memories. Diana's laugh echoing through palace corridors, her gentle correction of protocol when it seemed to create unnecessary barriers, her obvious love for her children, evident in every interaction he had observed between them, her growing confidence as she found her voice on issues that mattered to her. He also remembered the more difficult times, the tension that had become increasingly visible during her final years. The way her smile sometimes seemed forced during public appearances. The obvious strain that had affected not just her but everyone around her, including the staff who served the royal household. Dr. Chun was now positioning the necklace on its display stand, adjusting the angle so that the light would catch the stones to best effect. This particular piece represents such an interesting period in royal jewelry history, she was saying to her assistant. The design reflects both traditional elements and Diana's personal style preferences. You can see how it bridges formal royal protocol with more contemporary aesthetics. James wanted to tell her about that evening, about Diana's solitary moment with the necklace, about the sadness he had witnessed. But protocol prevented such personal observations, and he was not even certain that his memories would be welcomed in this academic setting. Dr. Chun was focused on historical significance and artistic merit, not the emotional resonance that seemed to emanate from the piece. The installation process was nearly complete when James noticed something that made his stomach tighten with unease. As Dr. Chun made her final adjustments to the necklace's position, the sapphire pendant caught the light in a particular way that created a brief, brilliant flash. In that instant, James could have sworn he saw Diana herself reflected in the stone's surface, not as memory, but as presence. The vision lasted perhaps a second, certainly not long enough for anyone else to notice. But it left James feeling disoriented and slightly nauseous. He blinked several times, trying to clear his vision, but the feeling of having seen something impossible persisted. His training told him that stress and strong memories could create such illusions, but the experience had felt utterly real. Dr. Chin stepped back to survey her work, apparently satisfied with the arrangement. "I think that completes the Diana Memorial case," she announced to her team. "We'll need to run final security checks and update the documentation, but the physical installation is finished." James knew he should feel relief at the completion of his assignment, but instead he found himself reluctant to leave the exhibition hall. Something about the necklace continued to draw his attention, as if it possessed some magnetic quality that defied explanation. He forced himself to focus on his duties, conducting his own visual security sweep of the area while the curatorial team packed up their equipment. As the afternoon wore on, James found his attention repeatedly drawn back to the memorial case. Other visitors began arriving for preview tours, and he watched their reactions to the newly installed display. Most paused respectfully, reading the informational placards and admiring the craftsmanship of the various pieces. But when their eyes fell upon the sapphire necklace, something changed in their expressions. An elderly woman who had been moving slowly through the exhibition suddenly stopped and placed her hand over her heart. A middle-aged man removed his glasses to clean them, though they had appeared perfectly clear moments before. A young couple who had been chatting quietly fell silent, standing before the case in what seemed like shared meditation. James began to realize that his own reaction to the necklace was not unique. Something about the piece was affecting visitors in ways that went beyond normal appreciation for beautiful jewelry. Whether it was the known connection to Diana, the inherent beauty of the craftsmanship, or something more mysterious, the necklace seemed to create an emotional response in nearly everyone who encountered it. His shift was scheduled to end at 6 o'clock, but James found himself reluctant to leave. Sergeant Williams had not assigned anyone to replace him in the exhibition hall, assuming that normal building security would be sufficient once the installation was complete. This meant that James could legitimately extend his watch if he chose to do so, a decision that seemed increasingly important as the evening approached. By 5:30, the last of the preview visitors had departed, leaving James alone with the completed memorial display. The evening light filtering through the tall windows created a different quality of illumination, softer and more golden than the harsh brightness of the afternoon. In this gentler light, the sapphire necklace seemed almost to glow from within, its blue depths shifting and changing like water. James approached the case more closely than he had dared during the day, when his professional duties had required maintaining proper distance. Now, in the quiet of the empty hall, he could study the necklace with the attention it seemed to demand. The workmanship was indeed extraordinary, but beyond its technical excellence lay something that spoke to deeper human experiences. He found himself thinking about the nature of memory and how objects could carry emotional weight across time. This necklace had been present during moments of joy and sorrow in Diana's life. It had witnessed her hopes and disappointments, her public triumphs and private struggles. In some sense, it had absorbed those experiences, becoming more than mere decoration. The thought occurred to James that perhaps what he was experiencing was not unusual at all, but rather a normal human response to encountering an object with such profound historical and emotional significance. Soldiers often spoke of feeling the presence of fallen comrades on former battlefields. Historians described similar sensations when handling documents or artifacts connected to pivotal moments in human experience. As darkness began to fall outside, James made the decision that would change everything that followed. Instead of ending his shift and returning home to his quiet flat, he chose to remain in the exhibition hall through the night. He told himself it was simply extended security duty, a precautionary measure given the high value of the newly installed pieces. But he knew in his heart that his motivation was more personal than professional. The building settled into its nighttime rhythm around him. Distant sounds of cleaning crews and night security patrols provided a gentle backdrop to the profound silence of the exhibition hall. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the floor, creating an atmosphere that was both peaceful and slightly otherworldly. James positioned himself in a chair near the memorial case, close enough to observe, but far enough to avoid setting off any motion sensors. From this vantage point, he could see the necklace clearly while maintaining his official duties. Hours passed in quiet contemplation as he found himself drawn deeper into memories of Diana and the complex emotions her presence had generated throughout the royal household. Sometime near midnight, as James sat in the soft glow of the emergency lighting, he became aware of a subtle change in the atmosphere around him. The air itself seemed to shimmer slightly, and he felt a presence in the room that had not been there before. His training told him to investigate, to identify the source of his unease, but his instincts suggested something beyond normal security concerns. He looked toward the memorial case and felt his heart skip a beat. The sapphire necklace was glowing with a soft, blue light that had nothing to do with the building's electrical systems. The glow pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, and within its depths James could see images forming and dissolving like dreams made visible. Diana's face appeared in the stone's surface, not as memory, but as immediate presence. She looked exactly as she had during those final months of her life, beautiful but touched by sadness, strong but burdened by circumstances beyond her control. Her eyes met James's across the intervening space, and he felt a connection that transcended the normal boundaries between past and present. "Hello, James," she said, her voice as clear as if she were standing beside him. "I've been waiting for someone who would understand." James Morrison had faced enemy fire during his military service, had stood guard during terrorist threats, and had maintained composure through countless royal emergencies. But hearing Diana's voice speak his name in the empty exhibition hall at midnight left him frozen in his chair, unable to move or speak. Every rational part of his mind insisted that what he was experiencing was impossible, yet the evidence of his senses suggested otherwise. The apparition of Diana stepped away from the necklace case, her form becoming more solid with each movement. She wore the same midnight blue gown James remembered from that final state dinner, and the sapphire necklace gleamed at her throat. But there was something different about her now, a quality of peace that had been absent during those troubled final months of her life. "You remember that evening," Diana said, her voice carrying the same warmth James had always associated with her. "I felt your eyes on me when I stepped away from the reception. You were the only one who seemed to notice that I needed a moment alone." James found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Your Royal Highness, this cannot be happening." Diana smiled, and the expression transformed her face with the same radiance that had captivated the world during her lifetime. "Please, just Diana. And you're right, of course. This shouldn't be happening according to everything you know about the world. But here we are." She moved closer to James's chair, her steps making no sound on the polished floor. "I need your help, James. That necklace isn't just a piece of jewelry to be displayed behind glass. It's connected to something important, something that needs to be resolved before I can find true peace." James struggled to process what he was being told. What do you need from me?" "The necklace was given to me by someone who claimed to love me, but it came with conditions I didn't understand at the time. There are documents hidden inside the pendant, papers that could damage people I cared about if they were ever discovered by the wrong hands. I tried to retrieve them before my death, but I ran out of time." Diana's expression grew more serious, and James could see the weight of responsibility she had carried even in life. "The man who gave me this necklace, Count Alessandro Benedetti, was not what he seemed. He presented himself as a patron of charitable causes, someone who shared my interests in helping disadvantaged children. But his real motivation was gathering information he could use for political leverage. James felt a chill run down his spine as the implications became clear. He was using you? Worse than that, Diana replied. He was documenting our conversations, our meetings, everything I shared with him about my work and my family. The papers inside this pendant contain enough information to embarrass the royal family and potentially damage several charitable organizations that depend on royal patronage. She turned to look at the necklace case, and James could see pain in her posture. I discovered his deception just weeks before I died. I was planning to confront him and demand the return of all documents, but I never got the chance. Now those papers remain hidden, and Count Benedetti's son has inherited his father's collection of sensitive materials. James rose from his chair, his protective instincts overriding his shock at the situation. What kind of damage could these documents cause? Alessandro Jr. has been making quiet inquiries about the value of his father's papers. My sources in the intelligence community suggest he's preparing to sell everything to the highest bidder. Tabloid newspapers, foreign governments, anyone willing to pay for inside information about the British royal family. Diana moved toward the memorial case, her hand reaching toward the glass as if she could touch the necklace through the protective barrier. The mechanism requires a specific sequence of pressure points, and it can only be activated when the necklace is removed from its setting. But, more importantly, it requires someone with official access to the collection trust, someone who could handle the piece without raising suspicions. The weight of what Diana was asking began to settle on James's shoulders. You want me to take the necklace out of the case? I want you to help me protect the people I love, Diana replied firmly. My sons, my friends in the charitable community, even members of the royal family who showed me kindness during difficult times. Those documents could hurt all of them if they fall into the wrong hands. James found himself torn between duty and compassion. His official responsibilities required him to protect the collection trust's artifacts, but Diana's request spoke to deeper loyalties that had developed during his years of service. What would happen if I were caught? I won't let that happen, Diana said with quiet confidence. I've learned things since my death, developed abilities that I never possessed in life. I can ensure that security cameras malfunction at crucial moments, that alarm systems experience temporary glitches. But I need someone with physical presence to actually handle the necklace. She paused, studying James's face with the same intense attention she had always brought to important conversations. I know what I'm asking of you. I know the risks to your career, your reputation, your freedom. But I also know the kind of man you are, James. You've spent your entire adult life protecting others, and this situation is no different. James thought about his daughter, now a successful teacher with children of her own. He thought about his pension, his retirement plans, all the practical considerations that should have made Diana's request impossible to consider. But he also thought about the young woman who had thanked him personally for his service, who had remembered his daughter's ambitions, who had brought humanity to the rigid protocols of royal life. How would this work? He heard himself asking. Diana's smile returned, brilliant and grateful. The exhibition doesn't open to the public for 3 weeks. That gives us time to plan carefully. Tomorrow evening, you'll volunteer for overtime duty in the collection trust. It won't seem unusual, given the valuable new acquisitions. Around 11 o'clock, you'll experience a brief power fluctuation that will require you to check the security systems. She gestured toward the memorial case. During your security check, you'll need to physically inspect the necklace to ensure it wasn't damaged by any electrical surge. The examination will require removing it from the display, which is standard protocol for valuable pieces after any kind of system disturbance. James felt his heart racing as Diana outlined the plan. And the documents? Once you have the necklace in your hands, I'll guide you through opening the hidden compartment. We'll remove the papers and destroy them immediately. The entire process should take no more than 10 minutes. And then, you can return the necklace to its display as if nothing had happened. The simplicity of the plan was both reassuring and terrifying. James had executed far more complex operations during his military service, but those had been conducted with official sanction and backup support. This would require him to act alone, trusting in the guidance of someone who was supposed to be dead. What about Count Benedetti's son? James asked. Won't he realize the documents are missing? Diana's expression hardened slightly. Alessandro Jr. doesn't know about the hidden compartment. His father never trusted him with that information. As far as he knows, any documents related to me are stored in the family's main vault in Switzerland. By the time he discovers otherwise, the papers will be ash and their contents will have died with them. James walked closer to the memorial case, studying the necklace with new appreciation for its role in this complex drama. The sapphire pendant that had seemed so beautiful in the daylight now appeared almost sinister, its depths hiding secrets that could destroy lives and reputations. Why me? He asked finally. There must be other people with access to this building, people with higher security clearances or better technical skills. Diana moved to stand beside him, her presence somehow both comforting and unsettling. Because you saw me that night, James. Really saw me. Not just the public figure, but the person underneath. You noticed when I needed a moment of privacy, when the weight of everything became too much to carry gracefully. She turned to look directly at him, and James felt the full force of her personality focused on him like a spotlight. More than that, you cared. Not because protocol required it, not because it would advance your career, but because you recognized another human being in distress. That quality of genuine compassion is rarer than you might think, especially in the world I inhabited. James felt a flush of warmth at her words, followed immediately by a stab of doubt. But what if I'm losing my mind? What if you're just a hallucination brought on by stress or medical problems? I could be about to destroy my entire life chasing a delusion. Diana reached out as if to touch his shoulder, and though he felt no physical contact, James sensed a presence of comfort and reassurance. Do you remember what I said to you that night at the charity event? About your daughter wanting to become a teacher? James nodded, the memory still vivid after all these years. I also asked about your wife's recovery from her surgery, Diana continued. She had been treated for breast cancer 6 months earlier, and you were still worried about her prognosis. I told you that she seemed strong, that she would probably outlive us all. James felt his knees weaken. He had never mentioned his wife's illness to anyone at the palace, and certainly not to Diana. The conversation she was referencing had lasted only a few minutes, and her comment about his wife had seemed like pleasant small talk rather than prophetic insight. How could you know about that? He whispered. Because I was there, James. Because I cared enough to remember, and because some connections transcend the boundary between life and death. Diana's voice carried absolute conviction. Your wife lived another 15 years after that conversation. She saw your daughter graduate from university, get married, have children of her own. She died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by people who loved her. The accuracy of Diana's knowledge removed James's last doubts about the reality of his experience. His wife had indeed lived far longer than doctors had initially expected, and her death had been exactly as Diana described. No hallucination or stress-induced fantasy could have provided such precise information about events that had occurred years after Diana's own death. I'll help you, James said simply. Diana's expression transformed with relief and gratitude. Thank you. You cannot imagine how much this means to me, and to everyone who might be hurt if those documents surface. She moved back toward the necklace case, her form beginning to shimmer slightly, as if she were losing solidity. I must go now. Maintaining this level of presence in your world requires tremendous energy, and I need to conserve my strength for tomorrow night. But I'll return when you need guidance. Wait, James called out. How will I know if you're there? How will I know I'm not just imagining your instructions? Diana paused, her image flickering like a candle flame in a breeze. Trust your instincts, James. You've spent decades learning to distinguish between real threats and false alarms, between genuine information and deception. Those same skills will serve you now. She began to fade more rapidly, but her voice remained clear. And remember, you won't be alone. I'll be watching over you every step of the way, just as you watched over me during those final difficult months. Sometimes protection flows in both directions. With those words, Diana's form dissolved entirely, leaving James alone in the exhibition hall with only the soft glow of emergency lighting and the weight of an impossible mission. He stood motionless for several minutes, trying to process what had just occurred and what he had committed himself to do. The necklace sat innocently in its display case, showing no sign of the supernatural encounter that had just taken place around it. But James could still feel Diana's presence in the room, a sense of purpose and urgency that would stay with him until their mission was complete. He checked his watch and was amazed to discover that nearly 3 hours had passed since Diana had first appeared. The entire conversation had felt like minutes, but the clock insisted otherwise. Dawn would be breaking soon, and James needed to be prepared for a normal day of duty while planning for an extraordinary evening ahead. As he finally prepared to leave the exhibition hall, James took one last look at the memorial case. The sapphire necklace caught the first rays of morning light filtering through the tall windows, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the surrounding displays. But now James understood that the necklace's true significance lay not in its beauty, but in its hidden capacity to either protect or destroy the people Diana had loved. Tomorrow night, he would discover whether her trust in him had been justified, and whether the bonds between the living and the dead could be strong enough to right an old wrong. For the first time in his 23 years of royal service, James Morrison was about to become more than a guardian of protocol and tradition. He was about to become an agent of justice for a princess who had never stopped caring about the people she had left behind. The morning shift change proceeded normally, with James providing a routine report that mentioned nothing unusual about his extended watch in the collection trust. He went home to his flat, ate a simple breakfast, and tried to sleep despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. But even in his dreams, he could see the blue glow of the sapphire pendant and hear Diana's voice asking for his help. By the time evening approached again, James had convinced himself that the previous night's experience had been real and that his commitment to help Diana was both necessary and right. Whatever the personal cost might be, some things mattered more than individual comfort or security. Diana had taught him that lesson during her lifetime, and she was teaching it again from beyond death. As he prepared to return to the collection trust for what would either be the most important night of his career or the end of it entirely, James Morrison felt a calm certainty settle over him. He had spent his entire adult life in service to others, and tonight would be no different. The only change was that his protective duties now extended beyond the realm of the living to encompass the needs of someone who had found no peace in death. The necklace was waiting for him, holding its secrets and its potential for both redemption and destruction. In a few hours, James would discover whether love and loyalty could transcend the boundaries of mortality, and whether one man's courage could honor the memory of a princess who had never stopped fighting for the people she cared about.